Hey, Kobe, you're the only one I see on screen. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thanks.
Hey there, Kobe. Thanks for all your good work.
Thank you.
You've been busting it. I can clearly see that.
Thanks. We're getting close to the deadline, so I wanted to make sure we got, even if it's rougher drafts, something that the committee can dig their teeth into, and I'm sure that we'll polish them some more between the committee and the commission.
I totally agree on both those fronts, and I've been doing a flurry myself and trying to send them the different directions so that we can get the best input we can. But I agree, it's like there's no time, so you guys get the drafts out there so start talking about them. Yeah, but both exciting and yeah, the sense of overwhelm just continues, doesn't it? Chair Petashner.
How you guys doing?
Just fine. Yourself?
Oh, good. All right. Give everybody another minute.
Yep. I see a bunch of people are here, but they've got their cameras off.
Let's see here.
I've got a list if you want me to take roll when we get there.
Sure. That'd be easier. All right.
Okay. I know it's so hard to juggle everything you're trying to do.
All right. We'll welcome everybody to the Organics Committee meeting of November 23rd. And item 1 is call the roll. Vice Chair Ward, please call the roll.
I'd be happy to do that. Commissioner Cadena. I saw that she was here. She's got her camera on, but no person yet.
Sorry, I'm here. Can you hear me now? I'm playing with a remote desktop VPN.
Excellent. Thanks. Yes, we can hear you. All right. Commissioner Ferrante.
Here.
Commissioner Kalpikov.
Here. And Commissioner Ferrante and I are matching today.
Excellent.
Yes, we are.
Commissioner Lapis. No, not yet. Commissioner Osaguera.
Commissioner Osaguera texted me saying that he's on vacation this week, so will not be attending.
Oh, that's too bad. Okay, Chair Petashner.
Here.
Commissioner Sky.
Here.
And Vice Chair Ward. Well, looks like all we're missing is Commissioners Petashner and Lapis.
Lapis and Osaguera. Yeah.
I'm sorry, excuse me.
We do have a quorum. Okay, let's move on to agenda item 2, public comment review. Let's see, Ms. Moreno, is there any public comment today for items not on the agenda?
We currently have no public comments at this time.
Excellent. All right, moving on to item 3, review and potential approval of the meeting minutes from the last committee meeting on October 19th.
Absolutely.
Move to approve.
I have a second.
I'll second.
All in favor? Thumbs up.
Everybody.
Moving right along. Okay, item 4. Recommendations relating to compostable packaging, food service, waste prevention, infrastructure, organic products, procurement, and market development. We have a number of proposals today. Why don't we start with Commissioner Sky and Lapis on a follow-up to compostable packaging?
Commissioner Lapis joined us at just the right time. Is it possible for me to share the document?
Yes, I will make you a presenter right now. Apologies, it's causing me a little bit of problems. Here we go.
No problem. Okay. trying to find the right screen to share. Does it need to be in a PDF for me to share it?
No, you should be able to share a Word document or your screen.
Okay. I may need to share the screen, so let me do that. Are you seeing the document?
Yes, if you could just zoom in a little bit, that would be great.
Will do. Just looks like my screen is frozen. Give me 1 second until it catches up. Okay. Is that better?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So, I'm looking at the right document. That would help. So
I was going to say, I don't think this is the right one.
Are we covering the compostable packaging?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I want to first thank Commissioner Lapis for helping me to work on this. It's definitely still in draft form, but I think we've valued the feedback from this committee and moving forward to the full commission to polish it even more. So our hope is to try to get to the next full commission meeting in December, but that depends on how much feedback we get from this committee. The background I'll go through very quickly. We talk about Integrated Waste Management Act, Senate Bill 1335, which really is the heart of the policy that we're building from to establish a solid definition for compostability and provide the same kind of oversight that CalRecycle has for their own purchases to extend that to the broader sale of products. And then Assembly Bill 2287, I thought was another relevant piece of legislation that we're looking at as a way of creating a standard for compostable or degradable that we can implement to ensure that what actually is added to our organic streams is truly compostable. The purpose, I think, is relevant as well to ensure the resilience of the organic waste management system and to ensure that we're advancing our statewide diversion goals and policies. And this will help to limit contamination and improve the quality and marketability of the compost and soil amendments that come through that system. There will need to be legislation to move this forward. The state has some authority under 1335, but we'll need to broaden that significantly to make this a reality. And we do think that this particular policy should be a priority for the commission. The additional funding, and this is something that we've discussed at the commission meeting, our goal is to make this not require additional funding because it will require the regulated entities to participate and fund their own certification, essentially. And I'll talk a little bit more about that further down. So the heart of the proposal is to create a certification process. Initially, there's kind of 3 key components, either an ASTM standard, D6400 or 6868, having a third-party certification, and then going through some kind of additional testing at a real world facility. We had already discussed making sure that these products were free from perfluorinated compounds, and so that will be part of the standard as well. And we want to make sure that there's clear labeling on the product, and that will, once the labeling policy is finalized, this policy can reference that directly. And then the most important part is to be explicitly accepted by composting facilities. I think there's also a little bit of the formatting on this next part. This should have.
Just to clarify, are you saying compost facilities like how 1335 deals with it, or just the specific facility that is got the program?
I think the thought is, since we're sort of mixing the 1335 and broader compostable packaging, that under the existing 1335 authority, the material needs to be accepted by the composter who services that state facility until a full rollout of 1383. And at that point, we need to basically either have sufficient field validation to show that the standards, ACM standards, are representative of California facilities, or have a process for testing at California facilities for a California standard.
And that's something that I definitely wanted to get more feedback from all of you. So the concept is that post 2024, which is essentially when SB 1383 will be more fully adopted and in place, the validation will be based on composting or anaerobic digestion facilities that compost at least 50% of the state's municipal organic waste throughput. That was the suggestion from Nick. My thought was a representative number of facilities, and whether it's some set number like 3 facilities that are representative of the type of processes that are managing the feedstock throughout the state. So that's another option for this kind of field validation. But I do think going forward that we want the products to be actually processed in facilities in California and show that they can go through that without adversely impacting the operations for that facility.
I'm sorry, my audio dropped. I had to jump on the phone. Can you just again explain how this matches up with 1330? All right, so here it is. Okay.
So it is implementation of 1335. Okay. In terms of acceptance.
So you still need to meet that. So it's not the specific program to the curve to a jurisdiction. It's this 50% of. Oh, hang on a second.
No, so the thinking is until we develop a process for either California testing or California composters have basically announced, that they're okay with the ASTM standard, and until we've rolled out all the composting infrastructure, the standard is the composter has to accept it. It's BPI certified, it's clearly distinguishable, and it meets the ASTM standards.
Yeah, but I have to re-review 1335 because I thought that was a different standard than 1335. 1335 I thought had to be 50% of all composting.
This would be a proposal for 1335. Had to be.
Sorry. Say that again?
Sorry, my Wi-Fi is not great, so I apologize. I don't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. I know. I was trying to say, I thought the 1335 standard was 50% of the statewide composting facilities had to accept the material, not just the program from where it's being served.
Yeah, that's the current proposal. I think my recommendation is that they change that. I don't think the current proposal necessarily works.
Okay.
So basically,
and that's where. But go ahead.
So Kobe's kind of initial version was a little bit more focused on the part about testing at California facilities.
Mm-hmm.
And my suggestion is that it does need, the field validation and testing at California facilities once we know what our infrastructure looks like. Because we're going to be rolling out the infrastructure next couple of years. We don't even know if we're going to have a whole bunch of AD facilities or composting facilities, if we're going to have ASP facilities or we're going to have, wet digesters. I mean, those are just very different systems. And so once we kind of have our set infrastructure, this will need to confirm that either the ASTM standard works and we're happy with it, or we have a way of testing for working in California systems. My thought was basically testing in facilities that represent 50% of the composting throughput versus a specific number. And my logic was only that I was worried that there would be.
Sorry, it's my son. I think he's funny.
That's fine. My logic was that I was worried that, you could have some backyard compost pile, glorified backyard compost pile that you would count as your facility. And you would have 3 of them or 4 of them or however many, but that would be not really representative of where the material is going to go. If we say 50%, that's the big facilities in the state. That was my logic, at least.
Commissioner Ward?
To say, my general concern about this is that once we're establishing these standards, I really need to have a lot of these processed organic materials move into people's fields. And if there's hesitation on doing that because of the persistence of microplastics and things like that, I'm very concerned about essentially saying, fine, all the compost that is produced in California is going to have little bits of microplastics in it. That's the way we roll. And that's going to create a lot of hesitation on a lot of farmers who are going to be asked to put this on their field and then raise this as an issue after the fact. So that's my concern. And the underlying concern about that is the people who are promoting the sale and use of these products don't have skin in the game. This fails, where's their cost? Their cost is ours, really. And I don't see a way of clawing that back. And that's not a small concern of mine, because what I see, we're going to be essentially limiting the different ways that all the different varieties of plastics can be used. And the folks who are purveyors of plastics are going to be looking at the new and different ways that they're going to be allowed to push plastics through the economy. And if there's an opening, they will push, is my anticipation, because they're looking to move their material. But if the way they move the material contaminates our markets, that's a fundamental problem that we can't get out of once we start it. So those are my underlying concerns, because if those of you who have been tracking the microplastic studies are basically showing, of course, it's not just the environmental toxicology of the chemistry, but it's also the environmental toxicology of the shape and structures of the little plastic bits that remain. And those can be biologically pernicious in different circumstances. They may not affect everybody. For a lot of these plastics, they'll go through the digestive tract with no impact. But at some point, you reach a critter that is just the size where the little piece of plastic clogs their digestive tract. Then that critter becomes part of the whole system. So all I can do at this point is voice these concerns and recognize that there are going to be people who are going to be trying to market these materials. And to the extent that we open that door, there's going to be someone shoving material through it. So,
I agree. I just want to understand one thing, Nick. Are you if I read this correctly, I could have one compost facility that's taking a BPI certified that was tested material, and that's the only compost facility in the state that is. Does that product now get to be labeled compostable up and down the state, no matter where it's sold?
No, I was really thinking of it in the context of 1335 specifically. So maybe that should be called out separately.
I just don't have to. How is that enforced?
My logic was specifically for a state facility. Until we have something better, the composter has to sign off before you can sell it. The service provider has to sign off. It has to be on the list of accepted materials. That was my logic for the state facilities. It doesn't mesh perfectly with the broader policy, so I can see how that's confusing.
So how do you see it would work with the broader policy?
The broader policy really kicks in the second section, where composters representing half of the throughput of the state would have to sign off on the product.
The concept that I had in mind was that there would be a short list of reference facilities that can be used, and that the operators could send it to any 3 of the facilities on that list as long as they were representative of the technologies in use. So at least one AD, one compost, and one other. And that would show that they are compostable in a facility. So you couldn't have, a particularly small scale or unique facility, or one that was more willing, say, to pass things through or to run them for longer than would be necessary. So there would be some kind of certification process. The facility would be on the list as a reference facility, and that would allow companies to use the ones that are closest to them or that make sense financially.
Moreno, it looks like there's a public comment on that.
Yes, there's one public comment from Nicole Quinones, and it says, are the draft compostable packaging policy recommendations available in the Google Drive? If so, can you please advise where? If not, can they be uploaded so we can better follow along during this meeting? Thank you.
We will be posting them right after this meeting. This is kind of like the first reading.
It really is a first draft.
Do you want me to keep going through the rest of it real quick?
Commissioner Ward's got a comment.
Eric, do you think, so I get your point about the individual facilities and how that's super confusing.
Yeah.
Should we pull that out all together and put it somewhere else in the context of state facilities? It must also meet this requirement.
I'm trying to figure out why. Well, why should this commission intervene with Cal Recycle's regulatory process on a piece of legislation that they're already doing the regs on, where it seems like they've been thoughtful through that process?
The bill specifically said we're supposed to be providing them input on 1335 implementation.
Okay.
I don't necessarily. I don't disagree with you, but just trying to do what.
Yeah, I'm a little uncomfortable with sort of coming in last second while I've had this regulatory process for a while. And then just real quick, can you remind me the 50% threshold, throughput threshold? How does that match up to the recycling committees and the labeling committees work right now when they're looking at other material types in terms of the number of MRFs that are accepting materials that are going to get labeled recyclable? Because I would feel like it should be consistent.
On recycling, it was 75%, but I don't think we've...
Yeah, so there's 2 standards on the recycling. There's 75%, which we've talked about, and the one that we hadn't talked about, but should have been included, and Jan was working on, is the 60% FTC standard. So 60% of consumers have curbside access to it. And then on top of that, I think we decided 75% of MRFs have to be separating it. We could easily do if we do Kobe's idea of representative of, then it should be those higher numbers. There should be facilities representative of 75% of the composting facilities. I was thinking just Recology would have to sign off, and because you represent 40% of the throughput, and you and somebody else, some other major composter, was kind of my original thinking, but Kobe's might make more sense. So basically, representative facilities that cover 75% of the
Yeah, I'm just speaking for me. I'd be more comfortable if it was consistent with the recycling standards for those items.
If I might chime in here, it seems to me, especially since they're going to, we're talking about potentially using specific facilities to demonstrate the compostability standard, and it seems like we've got the three main technologies of aerated static pile, anaerobic. So I'm wondering, could we establish standard facilities for these potential products to be tested, and that there actually be a testing fee that then goes to those facilities for providing that service? And that simplifies the process for the producers of those materials. It simplifies the testing processes, and it somewhat standardizes how recycles and those facilities roles without being uncompensated. So I recognize there's big differences between facilities, and that there might be some jockeying about how those are selected. What thoughts?
It's a good idea.
That's what I was trying to get at with the second bullet, but I'm very much open to suggestions on the language and how to improve it.
But to be fair, that would
if
not
folks feel comfortable.
The Tashner's suggestion that it matched the recycling standards, but in this way, I think they're different because you're talking about at least three different, significantly different processing technologies, whereas MRFs don't have quite that difference.
Right. That's part of what complicates the compostability standard, because we do really have very different technologies, and the feedstocks can vary based on those processes. So you have much higher tolerances for certain types of products in some facilities than in others. Dry AD, for example, probably wouldn't be a good reference facility because they typically, there are quite a few facilities that don't even make a compost product from the material that's left over.
Mm-hmm. Gio, you got a comment?
Do composters feel comfortable having one big composting facility that would serve as the testing ground for all California compostability? Or
I think you'd have to represent each technology. I don't think there's any way around that, and you'd probably want more than one representation of each technology.
Yeah, I'm thinking we might need more than one representation of each technology. And so I meant given that windrow composting, ASP composting, is going to be the main probably technology. If the other two are, dry digestion, wet digestion, or something like that, then, that would basically be one composting facility. And that, I don't know if that's enough.
I mean, I still feel like that's all well and good, but as long as you have that market barrier, which is in facilities, 75% of the facilities are taking this material, that's going to be the ultimate test whether or not it's compostable or not.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm less concerned with which facility is at least field testing it.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a comment, Nick and Kobe.
Yeah.
Is there, okay, so my concern has always been with what we can accept at my ASP pile is there's nothing that's compostable as plastic according to the CDFA and OMRI. So, we have a zero tolerance for it right now. If there is a product in the future, is there a fast track as part of this that we want to throw in there? If a product does get certified, let's say to be organic, and we know that it's not going to cause any harm and it's going to break down, that we can fast track that item onto the list, or get them certified at some point without going through the test. And maybe they still need a test or some tests to be done, but I'm assuming that those tests would have been done if they're already approved by the OMRI or the CDFA. And then my second issue with this whole policy is that it doesn't take into consideration the organics, certified organic facilities. So and I think it was 40-something% of the state currently has, are certified organic. So that it's so conflicting. And as we're doing some, some source planning in the 4 counties around us, they're calling us, asking about capacity, asking about what we can take, and we're like, no, that's not acceptable in the green waste stream right now. And I did some research. We're 98% organic is the buyers out there in our ag market, and I know 3 other facilities located in the valley that are operating the same way we are. So, even though they can make some of these standards, if we can't move the needle on the organics, it's going to be a tough. It's going to be tough.
Joe, would you feel comfortable making that another criteria that they would have to meet before they could be labeled compostable? That they got to get certified by OMRI or an organic system, which means they have to go figure out that policy with that agency right now.
And that's pushing them towards that agency that's regulating us too. I would take it.
I would not feel comfortable with that, because that's such a political decision of what is organic and what isn't organic. It's not a scientific decision. It's a political decision. And that would basically be saying we're completely banning compostable plastics altogether. And I don't think we can do that because I think we need the biobags of the world to roll out successful organics programs.
But to Joe's point, it's a market reality, which is if you're going to say these things can get to our site and then we can't sell the compost, what did we really accomplish?
Yeah, and if we're pulling them out anyway on the pre-processing line and it's going back into the landfill, what's the point? It's just increasing costs.
I think composters should, without a doubt, have the veto right for any material. And if you don't want to take it, then it's not compostable. But I don't believe tying it to the organic standard is a complete ban on all compostables. So even if you decide you're okay with biobags for food waste collection, they would be banned. And it's a pretty extreme policy, and I think it would be counterproductive to 1383.
What if we just carved out biobags?
I think the reality is that there are, the composting facilities like myself that are dealing with it right now. And our education that we have stamped going out to all 28 franchises say no plastics in the composting. And it's a conflict with 1383. I understand that. But the reality is we can't accept it. And there's multiple facilities in the valley that can't accept it. So stamping this, allowing, this is probably a cleaner process with this policy on what can get through there and what's going to be acceptable. I'm all for that. But my biggest heartburn with all this is being, having a demand on the back end for your product. And that's through organic certification.
Nick, besides the liner issue, is there other products that you feel that same way about?
Yeah, compostable plastic coated paperboard, takeout food packaging. I just don't know what our alternative is for takeout food packaging.
Yeah. I do worry about the impact to these more unique. We're seeing companies trying to develop products that really are compostable, and we're essentially preventing them from being considered before we start if we have that additional threshold. So I do think that it's good to have a higher standard for the organic certification, and that should probably be independent of this. But if I saw this as essentially the lowest common denominator, what would definitely be compostable at facilities, and then if there's additional requirements for compost that meets the organics standard, then that would be on top of this. Does that make sense? I think when you get to the point of making organic compost, and Joe, if you can speak to this, I'd love to hear it, but I heard from some facilities that they have different areas for organic compost versus regular. and then you're selecting what you process in that line. So if you had that kind of a system, the compostable plastic materials could be processed in that other area to just make generic compost, so it would have a lower value.
Yeah, and it's feasible. And Nick mentioned that probably 90 days ago, and I think that's what Recology is doing at some of their sites, and it had me thinking. But we've got 24 ASP bunkers, so you could actually run one of those bunkers at a time through this process, and it could be a non-organic one. I'm on the collection side too, though. I'm on the implementation, the education, and the collection side. So at what I'm trying to, and I've gone back to my staff and I said, well, where can we collect this at? I mean, at what part do you open up that stream of plastics, compostable plastics, inside your cities? Is it just a special event, like maybe a fair or a large, maybe it's a large special event, but you certainly can't do it and have the throughput through all your commercial or all your residential. So it's got to be a specialty program that's designed for an event, and and you can consolidate that material and bring it in. But that's 5%, call it 10% of what we're collecting. The 90% still has to be non compostable plastics. That's the reality. And then what diversion are we looking at that 5% event, right? You're going to get you could do it. It's feasible, but it's not something you want to roll out. You can't roll it out to all your customers. So at that point, it's still no plastics are accepted. And again, it's expensive to pull it out when they do get in there. You're not going to get all of it out, or you're not going to get all of it out on the generator side. So some of that's going to come through. You got to pre-process it and then compost it at that point. It's a challenge.
Yeah. I think that's in line with where we see companies trying to market these compostable plastics. It's going to be in those niche areas, particular restaurants or particular venues that want to be able to use it and collect it within their own ecosystem, essentially, and be able to send it to a facility that has that process where they can compost it. So that's where you have to show that facilities are willing to take it, that it doesn't create harm, and that it meets the certifications, and then you can use it. But on the operation side, on the collection side, you're still going to have to find those niche areas that it'll make sense to use it. But that'll be on the companies that want to use it and market it. It's on them to figure out where those niches make sense. At least this way, it's not too restrictive for them to meet the standard, because that's really the goal. We want these types of products to be the default if you are using them at all, and ideally you don't use them.
Yeah, I guess for me it's just a fun. Sorry, Laura, you've been waiting patiently. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I understand the difficulty with the situation here, because I know ages ago, very early on, we had talked about the reality of just saying no to bioplastics and how we may have already gone too far down this road and it's not feasible. But, it sounds like, Joe's telling you the reality at his facility. He pulls all this stuff out anyway. It doesn't compost. He doesn't compost it. If we keep going down this road, we're going to end up in the same position we are with recycling, where we've just been accepting everything. Everybody thinks everything's recyclable. It's not recyclable. And now we're saying that these very basic items that people believed were recyclable for years and years aren't anymore. Kobe, it kind of sounds like you're suggesting maybe doing something along the lines of what the recycling committee was doing with making this list of what might be accepted statewide, and then do the local ad. If you're going to do it that way, I think you have to start with the higher standards. What's accepted is what meets the OMRI certification, what meets the organic, all of that, and then the local ad is going to be these bioplastics, if you want to take them, if you can prove that. That's my thought.
I think the slight difference is that we won't have, well, I guess it depends on if we end up labeling compostable previously labeled compostable plastics as designed for trash, and that the ones that are the local ad would be just unlabeled, and only the ones that meet the highest threshold would actually get the compostable label and the color and everything else on it.
Here's a thought.
I'd be more comfortable with that.
So, I'll say that it's not a higher threshold because nothing can meet the OMRI, the organics certification.
You're saying that
as
today.
far as I know.
That's
right.
today.
So basically, you're saying it's a complete ban.
No,
unless some kind of local.
What I argue is the same thing we're arguing on recycling side, which is Laura said, which is you can't just say something is theoretically compostable because it works in a lab. It has to meet a marketplace and it has to meet existing infrastructure. It's not there's not any material talking to all the composters in the state. And we've had people on here say that it's either meeting the market or existing infrastructure. So if that's the case, then it can't meet that compostable label. So we're saying if we're going to create something that can meet the marketplace, it has to meet that OMRI standard that Joe and Laura is talking about. Otherwise, there isn't a market for it. And if you're less than that, then check your local program and maybe there's something special going on in your local program. Did I say that right for you and Joe and Laura?
Yeah, I mean, and my theory is I think we need to put a little bit more pressure on the organic, OMRI and the CDFA to really look at the products that they've banned. I think they can work, and I agree with Nick that some of these products can be compostable, and we'd be willing to take them all day long. That's not the issue. The issue is that regulatory-wise, we can't take them, and I've seen products break down in our piles, and they get through it and they work. But the problem is we're not allowed to accept them at this point. And until that changes, I think, then we can open it up. And I think this policy that you've guys looked at it and make it the highest standard, it works great. But until we get that green light from these folks certifying us, then it's out of our hands. It's really out of our hands.
I mean, it sounds like I'm in the minority, and maybe we can move it forward. But I keep looking at it from the perspective of really wanting to see successful organics programs and wanting to solve the plastic packaging issue, and from this side as well, from wanting to support composters. And I just can't imagine that we'd be able to roll out food scrap collection statewide without compostable plastics. And I think that composters are going to have to take it, and they're going to have to segregate their material into organic and non-organic. I just don't know. I don't think it's realistic that once we fully implement our 1383 infrastructure, that people will not take it.
I'm with you on the liners, Nick, since I see adoption with the liners at the residential level. I don't know if all the other stuff is as important to getting it implemented as you do. Ed?
Yeah, so a couple things. I basically see three major categories of the purveyors of bioplastics. In addition to the film plastics used for agricultural uses, you've got the bio bags, you've got to-go materials for restaurants, you've got materials that are available through grocery stores, and then you've got agricultural uses. So the biggest I agree with the bio bags. If you're going to do food waste collection, that's kind of an important part of the functional system at this point in time. The to-go materials, I have no doubt that the restaurateurs of California, especially during these COVID times, are very interested in having acceptable packaging. Call it recyclable, call it compostable, but they don't want it to be just thrown away, because that's going to be a non-starter in terms of the 75% goal. So they want it to be either one or the other, and they don't really care what they call it. I honestly don't think their motivation is about what's the compostability of it. It's about the saleability of it out the door. And unless we connect those two things, but I guess what I'm saying is that particularly with the restaurant to go ware, I see big conflicts with what's compostable, what's recyclable, and what's currently out there. And it kind of begs its own focus, because you definitely have the restaurateurs that are interested in it, you definitely have the composters that are interested in it, and they both care a lot. And I just don't know that we're going to be able to solve those problems adequately in a way that isn't going to have the restaurateurs of the world pushing back on us really hard, saying, call it what you want, we're going to still sell it. And I just see it as kind of a fundamental issue.
That is a bit of a concern, because if we do have a threshold that is so difficult that it excludes essentially any kind of bioplastic or compostable plastic, then I do worry that companies will just use it anyway, and we have a needle. Yep.
Okay, so I see that Commissioner Fashner needed to step out for a moment. So, all right. So, Commissioners Lapis and Sky, do you want to take another crack at this? What do you think the best step forward is now based on this conversation?
I would actually like for everybody else to take a stab at changing it to what they're comfortable with.
I definitely want to get feedback. I think it'll help to get it posted on our Google Docs and send it out to folks that we know have a stake in this and get their feedback, because I think that's what will ultimately help us to move one way or the other.
So if we post it to the Google Docs and then everybody could comment on it, then that would allow those comments to be visible, and then you could come back with a revision at the next meeting. Would that work for everybody?
That would be great.
Because there have been some great comments.
Do we have an extra meeting? Do we have a meeting before the next commission meeting?
An excellent question. Let me see what we've got here.
I think we're meeting again on the 7th, and then we have...
That's correct.
1 or 2 more full commission meetings after that.
Okay, great. Let's do that then. Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. So what I hear you saying is we're going to post to Google Docs. Everybody's going to come back with comments, and then Commissioner Sky and Lapis are going to come with another revision next meeting.
Yes.
But at that,
I'm good.
Anything more to be said on this issue, or issues do you think they need to consider as they're drafting these revisions, or is there anything else you want to cover further on what you've drafted?
Let me just briefly run through the rest of the policy. I think we covered definitely the heart of it. Ted, you talked about making sure that there's a fee that the certifiers are paying so that there isn't an additional burden. This was my attempt at doing that, so I definitely want to get your feedback on that part of it, if there's a better way to frame it, or to make sure that we're covering the cost so that we're not adding burdens to Cal Recycle. That's definitely the goal there. I think that's really the key parts of it. We also added language to make sure that there aren't like copycat products. So if there's something that's designed or has coloring that seems to be misleading, that those would be prohibited as well. And we'll have a mechanism to kind of exclude those products. So I will email it to you, Ted, and you'll post it. Okay, perfect. That's great.
Okay. All right. Anything more to be said on that item? Okay. Moving back to the agenda then.
The next proposal is this one that we can talk about briefly if you'd like me to cover it as well.
Yeah. Okay. We'll move on to that. Excellent.
So the simplest way to explain this is a policy that's complementary to the precautionary principle. The precautionary principle was focused on potentially toxic items like PFAS. This policy is more about moving out the products that create problems for recycling and processing. So if you think about things like film plastics that end up tying up machinery, or Tyvek envelopes, or flushable wipes, that's really what this policy is intended to address. And the intent for this was to actually elevate the policy to Cal EPA, because when you're talking about potential toxic items or products that are creating environmental issues at several different stages, it would, in our mind, was beyond just Cal Recycle, but something that Cal EPA could then delegate to multiple agencies within their umbrella to address. The intent was to talk about products that could contaminate the collection or the processing or the markets, or pollute the environment once they're processed, if they're disposed incorrectly or if they're processed incorrectly. So it really is kind of a broader, it's very similar to the precautionary principle in that way, but on the collection and processing side. The mechanism that we envisioned for getting this feedback was to issue a survey to get feedback from both agencies that are implementing collection and the facilities that are processing, and essentially target like the top 10% of those worst actors, essentially. So if they get feedback, and say we could even use a similar threshold to say if 75% of surveys come back and identify a particular product as a problem for processing, then that would initiate a regulatory process for that particular material. We would look at imposing penalties, such as a contaminant introduction penalty if this is a product that is creating contamination through the recycling process. You can also have an outright ban for products that there are alternatives already in the marketplace and they don't, the benefit of the product doesn't outweigh the impact, essentially. And there are other regulations that Cal Recycle or Cal EPA could implement to do this. So the surveys, this is the section of the policy that talks about who would be rolled out to. We want to get surveys representative of over 80% of the processors, over 80% of the respondents agreeing that a product is problematic, and then initiating essentially a regulatory process to address those products. So this one's a more straightforward process. The background is kind of similar. Integrated Waste Management Act, the bottle bill, the SB 1335, and the other bill we referenced in this policy was Senate Bill 212, which is creating, that's the one that creates a EPR standard for pharmaceuticals and sharps. And there could be a similar provision to require the manufacturers to develop a plan for how their products could be managed more effectively, and that would essentially get them off the naughty list. But the policy itself is essentially identifying what products are creating the problems and developing the right regulatory mechanism to address it. So any questions on this?
I really appreciate your efforts on this, Guy. I think you did a great job starting it out, and it was it's kind of hard to figure out the threshold about how do you trigger something, but as we were talking about it, part of my thought was you can have all sorts of parties that are interested in eliminating contamination, whether that's the facility operators or trade associations, or there's all sorts of different ways to get this sort of information out there. But once it's established that this is a problem for pretty much anyone who's doing this kind of operation, then we need to be able to have a mechanism where we get an actual response, right? So that's what this is set up to do. Essentially, If something's a problem for a municipal operation or a facility processor, then here's a mechanism by which we can raise that flag, put it to Cal EPA and say, this is a problem we got to deal with. Because the strategy of, say, going piece of legislation by piece of legislation after product by product is a loser. It takes up way too much time. It's too complicated. And the same principle we're applying is that if it's screwing up the process, we need to make it stop. And it shouldn't be that complicated that we have to make that argument over and over and over.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the legislative process followed by a regulatory process for each individual product is just so cumbersome. There's so much effort expended on the opponents and proponents of those policies. This is a way to just bring it down to the operational level and say, okay, Cal EPA, you're charged with evaluating when we recognize for the vast majority of whether it's processors or industry representatives that this particular product is creating a problem. Figure out the right regulatory mechanism to help alleviate the problems that are caused by that product. And there's a suite of tools that they would have up to and including a ban of the product. But more effective would be for industry to propose solutions that would have a vested interest in making sure that the solutions are effective.
Welcome back, Chair Potashner.
What I meant. I'm just kidding.
So I take that as a motion to move this proposal forward?
I had a start. Just a quick comment. I think this is great. My only thing, and I might have just missed this in the scrolling, is do you have a process for them to also recommend things or refer things to DTSC for their green chemistry program? That's another Cal EPA agency that deals with products.
I can spell that out in here.
DTSC is listed, but not the green chemistry.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's the safer consumer products program is what it's.
That is correct. That's correct. But Nick, I'm interested in your input on this. We've all dealt with Cal Recycle a lot, but I actually don't have a very good awareness of how well Cal EPA relates to its other member agencies. What do you think about the idea of putting, essentially, if there's a problem product, give it to Cal EPA and have them delegate? What do you think about that?
It's not my preferred structure, to be honest, and Cal EPA is not really well suited for that kind of work right now. I mean, they don't have any regulatory programs at all, as far as I know. And so the amount of work that would need to be recreated at the state level, that expertise that might already exist at the individual agencies, might not be the most efficient thing in the world. But there is a logic to saying that it's not always a waste issue. It's not always, a water quality issue. It's not always a toxics issue, or sometimes it's a combination of different ones. So it's a role that I wish Cal EPA played, but they never have in the past. And so that's why we have not proposed that. We usually recommended that things go to Cal Recycle.
Yeah.
And that's how the ballot measure is structured as well. But
yeah, my thought
there's
about
a logic to it, so I don't disagree.
Right, that was my thought, is that by kicking it to Cal EPA, then it's really it's more of a high profile thing, and it's my hope would be that it would be harder to ignore, but I don't know.
I would definitely hope that they would create a committee that could bring together representatives from each of the agencies and essentially delegate it, just like we're doing with the commission and the committees, that something comes in and it might touch on multiple committees. They delegate it, something is drafted, comes back up to Cal EPA to consider and then move forward that way.
And my other hope was that because Cal EPA is actually a cabinet level agency, that then when these things come up, that they might get that appropriate level of attention. Having this discussion, I move that we bring this forward to the next commission meeting. If there's any other feedback or additional modifications.
I would second that. So we'll get it posted on the Google Docs as soon as possible, and then have it recommend to the full commission to add it to their next agenda.
Excellent.
So, all right, Director Kastner, are you leading the vote to make it official?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Commissioner Cadena, are you around? No.
I see.
No, I'm here.
Okay, good. Is that a yes?
Were you voting yes on the last motion?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's 6 yes.
All right. So next up, we have Commissioner Ward. You have 2 proposals or 1 proposal? Right now?
Yeah, I have 1 proposal. The other one's just text. Okay. Laura, do you want to bring that up, or am I?
I can give you presenter view if that works.
That would be fine. Okay, so where's my share button?
You'll get a push notification momentarily.
Okay. There
Hopefully something popped up on your screen.
Yep, I got it. Okay. It says I'm sharing now.
Yep.
Okay. Carbon farming. So the main proposal that I have today is one on carbon farming. And I looked at the waste prevention strategies for organics, considering backyard composting, food waste prevention, food rescue. And essentially, CalRecycle's making good progress on all of those fronts. And I didn't immediately see anything that I could suggest that was low-hanging fruit about what more they should be doing. And maybe something will come up in future efforts. But what I saw that did need a little bit more emphasis, I thought, was the prospect of carbon. Those of you who are familiar with the work of the Marin Carbon Project probably know that they've demonstrated that a single one-time application of 1/4 inch of finished compost across degraded grazing lands will help sequester carbon on that property for the next 30 years, which is a really good piece of good news that we all could use. And since most of our communities have outreach programs related to backyard composting, and we all have a need to find more demand markets for composting moving forward, the soil carbon farming seems to be a really, really good avenue forward. So I'd like to see CalRecycle be a little bit more aggressive in how they're promoting carbon farming. And so that's what this is about. Essentially, it references the Marin Carbon Project, and essentially saying a 1/2 inch layer of compost on grazed rangeland can increase forage production by 40 to 70%, increase soil carbon sequestration for the next 30 years. So this proposal would essentially have CalRecycle doing an assessment of the potential for a strategic application of compost and mulch to help sequester carbon, to assess the potential for establishing standards for the application of those materials, especially in the aftermath of fires or as part of mine reclamation, develop adaptable outreach materials for carbon farming activities, and to build partnerships with communities who are promoting different carbon farming practices to support consistent measurement and analysis. And so I was not thinking that this would need additional staff or funding, and I was hoping that CalRecycle's existing resources and staff could accomplish those things. That's pretty much the essence of the proposal. They already do have a pretty good webpage on it, but it's not really community oriented, and it's hard to adapt to local conditions. And if you look at across the internet about different folks who are working on this, EcoCycle out of Boulder, Colorado is doing a really great community engagement process on carbon farming that I think. And with that, I'd be happy to answer questions, and I would like to stop sharing my screen.
Hey, Ted, I think this is great. Only thing that jumped out at me was no connection to the Healthy Soils program.
Oh, meant to have that.
You guys hear me?
Now I can.
You were breaking up quite a bit.
Healthy Soils program. Yeah, absolutely.
So sorry.
Okay. How would you have me reference that, Commissioner Lapis?
Well, I think that's really the CDFA Healthy Soils program is the venue for outreach to farmers and other.
There was a bill. In fact, I referenced.
If there is any incentive funding, that's probably the mechanism for using it.
Right, and there was a bill in 2019, SB 253 from Dodd, that essentially would have created the California Environmental Farming Incentive Program that would have provided that. But I had my impression from reading that legislation was that would be a new program and it wasn't building on an existing one.
And so I don't know if you talked, but there is a grant program right now for healthy soils on the Statewide issue, right? It's not the biggest grant program in the past, but I think it was maxed at $75,000 per farming program that can access basically money for free compost for this application.
Okay.
So, I don't know if we want to try to talk about bolstering the funding for that because it doesn't. I believe it gets swallowed up pretty quickly every year.
Okay. I will look at that. But I would like to move this forward because I do feel like it's, I have a couple of points. First of all, I think it's pretty low-hanging fruit, but it's also to build demand for the finished compost. So I don't think it necessarily has to go in January. It could wait until July, but I'm willing to just continue working on it. But if wanted to see what the group felt, should this be a rush job or should we flesh this out?
I'm okay with it. I think it's good.
Okay. All right. So
yeah, I think it's pretty much ready to go. Except I would add the thing that Eric mentioned of increased funding for the Healthy Soils GGRF program.
Well, since I started on this all by myself, I'd ask permission from the group that I can work with Commissioner Lapis to finalize that language before moving it forward. Everybody good with that? All right. Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted.
Okay. Next item's pretty short, and I guess I'll just put it this way, and I guess I could share the screen, but it's I just have some summary paragraphs on food waste prevention, food rescue, and on-site composting. And there's really isn't anything more than the links and brief summaries on those topics about what CalRecycle is already doing. It's descriptive, but there's no policy involved. I'd be happy to share that with you, but it is just. But it's something that I think we should incorporate into the document as we're moving forward and fleshing it out. I share the screen again?
Sure.
Okay. There we go. Can you see that? Yes? No? We seeing that? Okay, good. All right, so food waste prevention, CalRecycle has assembled a variety of outreach tools and gives the link. Also, California is part of the Pacific Coast Collaborative, which is committed to supporting businesses that are implementing measures to reduce and prevent wasted food in the region by 50% by the year 2030. So I think there's potential to build on that, but honestly, I'm still educating myself as to what. Food rescue, there's information that's out there, and of course, CalRecycle has started the food rescue grants, but I'm certain that those programs generally are going to be challenged to find the ongoing funding after the sunset of that grant program, and I don't know what that looks like. But again, I'm still educating myself about how we might be able to improve. Similarly, on-site composting, which includes both backyard composting and community composting, and those certainly could be promoted more aggressively. But at this point in time, there's lots of good information out there. And in terms of the food rescue, we already had a good proposal on that front, which we'll be able to incorporate. And that's certainly one of the highest priorities for a lot of communities trying to address 1583. If there's anybody who has additional ideas about policies we might be able to move forward on any of those topics, I'd be happy to work with you. But at this point in time, I just haven't found much.
I think these are good resources. I would move that we add them to the relevant section of the report.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
All right.
Okay.
Good. Thank you.
All right. Joe, I talked to Alex a little while ago. It sounds like we're not quite there yet on infrastructure proposals. Does that sound right?
Yeah, he wanted to match up with the kind of the same language moving forward with the infrastructure committee and the research that they've done on the organic. So I know he's working with those folks right now on not reinventing the wheel. So
okay. You know, because we're running out of time, I do think it's worth putting something in the narrative around issues that we've talked about. I think, you know, Howard Levinson had chimed in on one of the public comments and pushed forward the 2018 study on air permitting. And we may want to just have something in the narrative around VOC credits and the need to sort of align air districts in terms of how they're measuring VOCs and GHG emissions when we're talking about pulling material out of the landfill and composting it. There isn't sort of a balancing of that equation right now, the way air permitting works. We may want to just talk about that as like a narrative of something that needs to get fixed. I don't think we have what the policy answer is there yet, but that's probably worth highlighting. And the other one that we've heard about in the past is just local land use CEQA permit timelines. I think we probably should put together a short paragraph on the need for further sort of inquiry and policy recommendations coming down the line on that as well.
Yeah, Eric, Alex and I spoke in length on the VOC emissions, and with that narrative in there, it you know, you're looking at pulling out X amount of food waste from a landfill and composting it and having to get a backed technology at the air board. And, you know, we're at a 95% reduction, but we had to buy offsets for the 5% and got zero credit for the 95% emissions that we captured. Mm-hmm. And Alex went through some of that with his facilities, and you probably have too, Eric. And so, yeah, it's a big issue. And developing something that takes credit for the VOCs that were removed with the backed technologies that are out there, whether it's a ASP or some new technology that they're coming out with. There's with the air board, it's a new source basically when you start a new permit up, and that new source is whether you get 80% or 95%. There's still that 5% that they look at as an emission. Rather than you removing, 100% from a landfill. So, that's a huge issue, so I agree with both of those.
So maybe next week Ted, would it be too late to get that narrative in for the next meeting into the final report?
If
not a proposal, just more of the narrative.
I think actually narrative is fairly easy to add. Because okay. I don't think there needs to be much of a process on that, because we don't have to go through the approval process. So long as you're all stating general fact issues, I don't think there's an issue. Regarding the infrastructure, though, I do think it's really important to have the narrative indicate the huge disconnect between the ambitious state goals and the actual status of the infrastructure and the timing necessary to develop that infrastructure. I definitely think, even if we can't come up with a policy, we need to state that issue really clearly.
Yeah. Okay. Other than that, I don't think there's any more recommendations for the day. We can move on to item 5. I do not have any folks here today presenting. It's Thanksgiving week. I think it's going to be a light week. I think we can move on to item 6. We have our scheduled next meeting is on December 7th. Is there any items that folks want to make sure we add to that meeting?
It seems like we should be talking about infrastructure.
Yeah. There is an agenda item on that subject, so easy to backfill. So, Joe, if you and Alex can add to that for next week, for the 7th?
I hope so.
Okay.
Is there any way that we should be engaging with folks who are selling to-go food? I mean, the whole challenge of to-go restaurants, food packaging, is it compostable? Is it recyclable? We want to try to formally engage with that sector?
I think that makes sense.
I do too. I really think that we need to, because I don't know if they're hearing that all the options we're considering don't look very good for them at this point. And I'd like to try to have a real conversation because I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. But at the same time, we have a big problem.
Okay, well, if commissioners want to email me ideas of folks that sort of fit that definition in terms of the restaurant base, we could also invite the California Restaurant Association if they feel like they have a good handle on that. I'll send an invitation to them as well.
California Restaurant Association, I think would definitely be it. I'm wondering if there's some way we can connect with the packaging companies, the manufacturers. I would definitely want to hear from the paperboard manufacturers because I know that there's a lot of pressure for them to meet standards for products that don't leak through and that, hold up, but are also inexpensive and are also compostable. And, what can we learn from them, incorporating PFAS into some of those products that we can avoid the next problem. I know there's a very active plastic packaging food service group, but I don't think they'd have a lot of productive feedback because I think they're out of the loop. They're more going to be focused on the recycled side to show that products that they use are recycled, but they're not going to be part of compostability standard. So I don't know if there's a paperboard equivalent of that group that we can invite.
So there's the American Forest and Paper Association that could make some
food packages.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's the Food Packaging Institute, which covers both plastic and fiber.
Yeah, American Forest and Paper would be another good one that's more focused. I think would be a better group for us to have a frank discussion with.
Okay. All right, well, let's send those invitations out. Item 7.
Okay.
Robust discussion today. Anybody have any parting thoughts?
I can summarize. I'm uploading the problem products, incentives, and disincentives. I'm working with Commissioner Lapis on adding healthy soils to the carbon farming proposal. I'm uploading the language on that we talked about on organics waste prevention efforts. Mr. Kai and Mr. Lapis are working on their proposal revision.
Right, and I think you were going to post the draft with the revisions from today just so that other stakeholders can review it and provide feedback, and we'll have a revised version to share with this group at our next meeting.
Will do. And I'll make sure that I'll work with Chair Patashner to make sure that the items that are in the policy proposals for the organic section match the ones that are in.
Great summary. Very, very constructive meeting. Thank you all so much.
Thanks.
Oh,
All right.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn and enjoy a good Thanksgiving to everyone.
Second, you guys have a
Everybody.
Yeah, have a good Thanksgiving. Stay safe.
Giving.
Take care.